На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. Back to our usual time of recording, this week we'll discuss the squads for both the Sbornaya and Under-21 teams for the upcoming national break, the first of which under Valery Karpin, the new Russia boss. We'll then recap all the latest in the RPL before rounding off with a quick look over the Hypercube Reform proposals. To discuss all that, I'm joined, as usual, by David Sanson.
Evening, James.
And Richard Pike.
Good evening, James. Good evening, David. How are we all?
I don't know. It's a little bit of a... I feel like it's been a slow start to the summer, or to the season, sorry. It's been a bit odd so far. I think the football domestically has been quite good, but obviously the stagnant transfer market and then generally stagnant, and then the disappointing Conference League results has put a little bit of a dampener on my less than stellar often optimism anyway. But one of the interesting sort of distractions maybe has been the appointment of Valery Karpin and his bizarre comments in particular last week, in which he claimed that he did not like the majority of the positions and listed off a list of people in different roles that he didn't think was up to the job or up to the standard. Now, in spite of that, he has actually named his squad for the upcoming international break. And to quickly run through that, there's a return for Guilherme in goal. He's also joined between the sticks with Chupin of Rubin, Maximenka and Sergei Pesyakov. The defenders, Zhikia, Deveyev, Karavayev, Kudryashov, Magkeyev, listed as a defender, Osipenka, Samoshnikov, Terlechov, Fernandez, and Dmitry Chistyakov. Midfielders are Bakayev, Barinov, Golovin, Yorokin, Zhemaletinov, Yonov, Zahayan, Zobnin, Kozyayev, Makarov, Milanchuk, Mukin, Fomin, and Cheryshev. And the three strikers are Zabolotny, Smolov, and Chukavin. Now, Chukavin, Sergei Terekov, Osipenka, Magkeyev, and Maximenka all could potentially make their debuts. And we have 4 foreign-based players. So it is quite a different squad from ones that we had seen in the past, David. Is there anything that you're surprised by or maybe even pleased or disappointed by in this announcement?
Well, today, I think pretty much I saw today, they've also called up Lunyov. So that's 5 goalkeepers he's called up, none of which is Safonov. I think that's a bit harsh because Safonov was actually pretty good in the Euros, I thought, Guilherme obviously shit bed. I don't know if I can swear like that, but he did in the first game and was quickly replaced by Safonov, who, he put on a good display for himself, I thought. In the remaining two fixtures, even though obviously Russia were not good, he himself was decent. So I was a little surprised. Well, definitely surprised to see Guilherme. I'm not half surprised to see a couple of Rostov players there. Obviously, with his past in Rostov, Pesyakov, he's a bit ancient, to be honest. I think it's a waste of a call up when there's others around. But it's nice to see Maximenka there, and it'll be interesting to see. One of his comments was that he didn't think Russia had a first choice goalkeeper. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see who he gives some games to. Obviously, the Croatia game being the big one, and then Malta and Cyprus. Maybe he can experiment a little bit because they are slightly weaker opposition. So that was the first sort of standout. Presumably this squad is big, and I don't know what the rules are with these COVID times. Like, obviously 5 subs is still a thing. So are they allowed bigger squads, or is he going to have to chop some players out of here? I don't know. Good to see a bit of some fresh faces. 3, if we included Magkeyev, 3 fresh defenders. Because Magkeyev was brought through as a centre half, but obviously at senior level was played predominantly as a CDM. But then in the under 21s, we had the opposite situation happening with the player. 2 left backs there, Samoshnikov and Terekov. It would seem to me that we're going to get at least one. One of those two is going to play. There's as you said, there's 5 players who might get their first cap. Well, actually, there's 5 players who've never been in the squad before, but also Samoshnikov, Dupin, Makarov, Zakharian. There's 9 players that are uncapped in this squad, and I'm not sure if Chistiakov has a cap either. There's plenty of uncapped players in here. I think there's going to be some experimentation with the bench, with the defence. I think he could play 5 at the back because Terekov and Samoshnikov both. Terekov obviously has starred for Sochi as a wing back, Samoshnikov as a full back, but I can just see him going with 5 at the back. But a hell of a lot of midfielders in there. Obviously, we're calling for some Makarov during the Euros just to give Russia a bit of something, because we know what he's like. So unpredictable. I think there's a lot of deserving call-ups in there. Obviously, a little bit disappointed still to see Yonov hanging around, considering sort of how average he is. Zabolotny, sort of, I guess, there instead of Zuba. Zuba he's had a poor start to the season. I don't think he's got a goal or an assist yet. Came off the bench in their last fixture, didn't start. Has obviously got some past history with Karpin. So I guess Zabolotny is sort of being promoted into the Zuba spot. Zab's, to be fair, started the season fairly decently, I thought, at CSKA. Was a real threat in the Ufa game earlier on in the season. Scored the goal in that game. And then Smolov getting back in the frame, which is nice for him. And Tukarvin, obviously a nice deserving call-up, I think. Him and Zakharian have a real rise over the last year, and it'd be nice to see them potentially get on the pitch. Overall, I have largely positive, and I thought we were going to get a positive squad because Karpin has, at club level, been wanting to use younger players. Obviously, there's still a couple of weird ones. I wouldn't have had Kudryashov or Yonov in there, but I can get behind the bulk of the rest of the squad, I think.
Yeah, I think, as always, football's a subjective game and you're not going to agree with every decision, but there is at least a direction that he's going in, which is promising, even though he's probably only a short-term appointment. He said himself that. But I will just quickly expound upon what you said in Karpin's interview on, what was it, Monday morning, I believe it was, his press conference. He said that that he was concerned by the exact term, phrase was, everything about Sbornaya bothers me. I'm bothered by many things, especially the fact that we don't have a clear number one, as you said, David. But it's true for other positions as well. He actually claimed that it was Kafanov, the goalkeeping coach, who chose his goalkeepers and not him personally. And that's why there's so many of them in such a disparate selection. He said, I'm bothered by everything, the centre-backs, full-backs and forwards. I'm bothered by the players' current form. Zuba and Sobolev are not in their best form. Many things. Mario has to be subbed. Samoshnikov has to be subbed. All of this bothers me. Now, that was published on Sport Express, but it was obviously quite openly said by Karpin in a press conference, and I'm not quite sure what he's trying to do here. If he's trying to set up a get-out-of-jail-free card at the very start. I mean, look, he's partly not wrong. I thought, like, a lot of these players are out of form. There is question marks over who Russia's number one is currently. I think you asked 10 people, they'd probably give you 5 different answers, which just explains why there's 5 goalkeepers. What he's saying isn't necessarily wrong. I just don't necessarily agree with that's how you start your first ever press conference in your job, in the biggest job in the country is the national team boss. It's a little bit odd, but Richard, what do you think about the squad in general? Quickly, are you enthused? I'm particularly glad that Smolov is being recalled and Chukavin as well to make his debut.
Yeah, overall, I'd like to echo David's sentiments and yours, James. I think I'm quite happy with the squad. Yeah, there's obviously still a few names in there which I'd rather not see. I think Kudryashov should definitely not be in there. I'm disappointed Guillerme's back, and likewise disappointed with Ionov. But apart from that, yeah, I'm quite happy with the squad actually. I think I look just briefly now. I think it's 11 uncapped players, which is very, very nice indeed. So it's definitely indicative of a new era. I think the players that have been playing well have been rewarded. Happy to see Terekov in there from Sochi. He's had a good season last season, carried that on this season so far. Samoshnikov's been rewarded, which is correct too. Like David said, that could be a straight fight for the left back spot. He's Mukins looks like he's made a decent start at CSKA. Makarov too. Happy to see Smolov back in there. He's shown his versatility too by, playing slightly off a striker at Lokomotiv. He's played both as a main striker and as a support striker, so that's handy too. I'm quite enthusiastic about the squad, and as for Karpin's comments, it's a bit strange to make them at the first press conference, but I think it is. It's understandable to dumb down expectations, because I think after the Euros, expectations have dropped post 2018 World Cup. So it was a bit of a strange time to make them, but I do kind of understand dumbing down expectations a little bit, because it is a tough group that Russia are in to make the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Croatia and Slovakia are not easy opponents at all, even Slovenia. Overall, I'm quite happy with the squad, and I like, throwing it out to the goalkeeping position wide open, saying, look, it's up for grabs. Whoever wants it, impress me in training and you'll get it. So, quite happy with the squad overall. Not too many qualms. So, positive start from Karpin, the squad-wise anyway.
Yeah, I think it was just a weird monologue. I wonder if he's trying to... I mean, look, in Russia, it's the birth of many... The geographical area of where many memes were birthed. Self-depreciation and sardony is two of the most sought after and highly praised forms of comedy in Russia, particular, and forms of opinion in general. And lots of Russian football fans are not really particularly enthused at the moment. Look, just like we aren't, you have to be blind to be blindly optimistic. And I think he's just kind of telling a lot of the fans what they want to hear. He did that a lot of Rostov too, as well. I'm not particularly fond of Karpin as a coach, don't get me wrong. He was an absolutely brilliant footballer. But he's the man who should be not saying this publicly. Yes, say it privately. Yes, say it to his assistants. Maybe say it to some of the players, some of those who maybe need a bit of a kick up the arse and not an arm around the shoulder. But saying it in his very first press conference is just not giving off a good signal to the players in particular. Like when he said everything about Sbornaya, especially the fact we don't have a clear number one, that's really not going to be very good motivation for the goalkeepers. I mean, on one hand, yes, he's setting a challenge out there to go grasp it, go get your number one. But he's also basically saying, instead of saying, oh, we've got lots of good options, but we're not sure who's the best, he essentially said that they're all shit, which is just not very good motivational and psychological work. And so much of international football is based around that. Chris Coleman, who took Wales to the 2016 Euro semis, completely unexpectedly with what was essentially a weak squad and two superstars, one in particular world-class player, did so a lot around getting the best out of that world-class player, building the team around him, and then installing a very strong mentality and a tight psychological bond around the whole squad. It's just not the greatest of starts from Karpin, but squad composition, not too bad. I'll leave it at that. And with that, we will quickly move on, because there are obviously no games to discuss yet in terms of the internationals. We'll move on to the Under-21 squad, which was also announced at the beginning of the week. And this one's got a few more surprises and potential names that many people might not recognise first off, obviously with the recent strong generation aging up beyond. But this is the under-21s. It's Katsev, Borosko, Budachev, Prokin. Some of the big names there: Stanil Stepanov, Kirill Bozhinov, Konstantin Maradashvili, Nailo Myarov, Mikhail Ignatov, Timur Suleimanov, Kirill Klimov, Kamil Dagalarov. So, sorry for the poor pronunciations, but I was just reading as going along. Some of them are in particularly fine fettle, playing regular RPL action this season, David.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, old generation they weren't under 21 by the time they played in the actual tournament. They were pushing 23, some of them. So these guys are now fully all under 21, all born 2000 later. You got a nice mix. You got Prokin playing regularly in the Premier League, Stepanov, Lucevic playing regularly, Maratishvili, Umyarov, Chernikov, Krasnodar played every game this season, Karpuzov, Suleimanov, Galarov. You can almost put together from that team a full 11 of regular RPL players still. And even then, the ones that aren't filled with regulars, you can put semi-regulars. Even Agkatsev played for Krasnodar on the weekend. Borjanov's on the bench a couple of times off the bench for Khimki. Solyanov's off the bench for Lokomotiv. Perutsev for Karelia off the bench a few times as well. And there's even a couple of foreign-based players, Yosifov and Savikian, who are both out in Spain. Obviously, Yosifov went to Villarreal this summer. So it's an interesting squad. And yet there's still some fairly big names who have been left out. Some surprising names. I mean, the one who actually not terribly surprising that he was left out is Nikita Krivtsov. But he's been without game time. He's actually just signed for Korea over the weekend. So no surprise really to see him left out considering he's without game time, but expecting that maybe he'll get back in soon. But Valery Karpin from CSKA, you thought could be still there. Obviously, we were sort of probably all expecting Karpin probably to be involved, but he's been ushered up to the next stage. Pinyaev's been playing in the RPL, not involved. Sukholninov for Rostov's been playing regularly in the RPL, also not involved. And even the other Litvinov, so you got Rodzan Litvinov from Spartak's in the squad, but Vladislav Litvinov from Krasnodar, not involved. And he's also been playing in the RPL this season. Same with Kirill Former from Rostov. So, there's some strong names who have been left out of the squad still. Definitely the weak point appears probably to be centre half. Prokin, really good. I think he started the season very well, in fact. For Sochi, he's played pretty much every game, and I think he's come on quite well. Obviously, he was at fault in the first leg against Partizan for the goal, but I still think he's coming along very well. And it's strange to think that I'd forgotten that actually he doesn't even belong to Zenit anymore. They sold him to Rostov this summer, and he's on loan at Sochi from Rostov, which I'd completely forgotten about until Rostov boasted that they had a player in the under-21 squad. But alongside him, you've got Karmaev, who was not too good in the previous under-21 friendlies, and then two players who are getting their first call up at this level, which is Kirill Bolshakov, who's playing for Olymp Dolgoprudny in the FNL on loan from Khimki, and Kutitsky from Dynamo Moscow, who has, I think, made one appearance in the RPL in the past, just off the bench, but he's regularly training with their first team, regularly on the bench, but he's yet to sort of break through for them. But the midfield is certainly looking very strong. Almost that whole midfield that's in the squad have played in the Premier League this season, apart from Savikian and Yosifov, and that's because they're abroad. All the rest have played in the RPL. And with Suleimanov and Galarov, you've got two strikers who have started the season well in the RPL too. So starting to see it come together. When we looked at the squads back in April and trying to pick out where it was going to go with the next gen, I think we've improved since then. Actually, the biggest surprise to me was to see Botnar left out. He's the goalkeeper regular. They've started every game for Topina Moscow. They're top of the league in the FNL. They've only conceded twice this season. And he's not in the squad, which is a surprise because the other three goalies not getting as much football as he is. So that was a shock because I thought he would be involved. But they've decided to bypass it. But good squad. I'll be keeping an eye, watching the games once they play, and see how we get on. Some of these guys have come from very modest roots. Agalarov was at Angie when they qualified for the UEFA Youth League, and Bolshakov's, I think, Crimean of Crimean heritage. Some nice, interesting players in there, and I'm looking forward to it.
And David, a quick little return to yourself. You've been doing some research into the minutes played and usage of under 21s, is it, so far in the RPL? I don't know if you want to go into that ever so slightly, just give the listeners a quick tease of what you've been finding out so far.
So I've been keeping track of a bunch of old stats on RPL and the FNL. The one that I found interesting, I sort of put it to the group the other day, was which team this season in the Premier League have used the most academy players under 23 age, because I'm predominantly focused on the younger guys. And it was actually Krasnodar who've used 7 players from their academy under 23 on the pitch so far this season, which surprised me considering their old squad. But then you sort of think about it. Obviously, you've had Safonov and Akatsev, both have played in goal. Litvinov came off the bench this weekend for his first appearance of the season. Chernikov and Spurtsian have played pretty much every game in midfield. And then Shapi has come off the bench a couple of times. So it's the 7th. So they've got a few, but then once you start getting older, that would soon drop off. And I think if you were to branch out and include a few more, you'd see Loko, with guys like Baranov and Miranchuk, who are older than 23 but are also from their academy, or Dinamo, where you've got Yevgeniev, Shunin, or Cisco, where you've got Akinfeyev, Zagoyev, Shenikov. Those squads have still got a lot of their own academy players, but in terms of the ones who are coming through now, Krasnodar are currently the team who have used the most. Loko and Spartak are up there as well. Obviously Spartak have got Maximenko playing on the regular. Ignatov's also been playing, Bakayev. And then Loko have got Rybchinsky, Kulikov, Makayev all playing regularly at the moment too. So, that was just an interesting one. You've still got 6 teams who've yet to use a player from their academy this season. And then 2 teams altogether, Ufa and Nizhny Novgorod, who've not even included an academy player in their matchday squad so far. But the situation definitely has been improving. I've been monitoring these sort of figures for the last couple of years and definitely seeing a big increase over the last few years in the number of under 23 players who are being used in the RPL. It's no longer an old league, I would say. It's definitely becoming a younger league.
Yeah, good. It can only be good for the long-term future of the division, and I hope that I would presume anyway that the limit chick development that we've lauded so often is actually making quite an impact upon that by forcing younger players to play regular first team full level men's football, adult football, as opposed to being left in the youth leagues. And of course, having more progressive managers like Sandro Schwartz, and for instance, he deserves the utmost credit for giving so many youngsters a chance at Dinamo at the same time, which is a big risk. And the pressure's high there. Pressure's very high there. So it's only good for the long-term future of the RPL in general. And if we do focus away from Sbornaya and the under-21s now onto the RPL, we had another round of fixtures at the weekend. And Richard, you kept an eye on Lokomotiv versus Zenit, which was one of the big name games of the weekend.
Yeah, I did. And, I was really shocked when I saw the starting lineup to see Noah Tomzuba in there. Now, obviously, look, I think we all can agree that, as David mentioned earlier, he's not particularly a good start to the season as Zuba. And he's come back from the Euros. He's not scored or assisted. He didn't have a great Euros either, although I think the tactics didn't help there. But going back to Zenit, even for Zenit, he's not had a particularly great start to the season, not looked himself. Asmoon has definitely outshone him up front with goals and assists. And he was dropped, obviously, for Alexander Yerokin, who took his place. And I'm beginning to wonder if this is now going to be a sign of the times going forward for Zuba, because he's out of contract next summer. And, obviously Zenit have just made their big signing in Claudinho. So I'm beginning to wonder if this is Simak perhaps, adapting now to eventually looking to bring in Claudinho to play alongside Asmoon. From what I've seen of YouTube highlights of Claudinho, I haven't actually ever seen him play, but from what I've seen of YouTube highlights, he seems to be a player who, whilst he does operate in the wide spaces, I think centrally is where probably Zenit are probably going to be looking to play him. He definitely looks like a creative player who can, feed Azmoun balls to score. So maybe it hints at a change of style from Zenit. And I definitely saw during the game that Zenit were, starting to play definitely a lot more shorter passes and on the ground. There was a lot less direct passing, primarily a result of not playing Zuba. So I'm beginning to wonder whether this is now Samak doing this to prepare for the introduction and integration into the squad of Claudinho. And I think, to be fair, I think it's a good move to do this now because the Champions League matches are coming up soon for Zenit, and it is absolutely vital this season that they do better. Obviously, it's draw permitting, but, given the early exits of Sochi and Rubin, we definitely need Zenit, if they can, providing they get a nicest draw, to do more in Europe this season. And I think it is important now to build the side, not just focus on Zuba, now build the side around Claudinho. Zuba is still a good squad option to have, I think, but I think now Claudinho is the man who you've brought in as your big summer signing. And I'm intrigued to see what Zenit will do now with that. It was nice to see a different style as any, and sometimes the passing was a little bit off, but obviously I'd rather they work on this system now and get it right for when the Champions League matches come around. It was a decent game. I thought, Zenit probably did deserve to win. Azmoun in particular missed a gilt-edged chance in the second half. I thought Malcolm had a decent second half before he went off. There was one ball he put through on the counter, which was perfect for Azmoun. It was just a perfect cross into the box, but Azmoun didn't finish it. Kuzayev was correctly sent off. I mean, he was very lucky to stay on the pitch, actually, in the first half, because he'd done a second foul, and it was a second yellow card, and he was lucky to stay on then. And I think the red card, the second yellow he got was correct, because he was lucky in the first half. Loko just hung in there. But yeah, it was quite intriguing to see this style switch from Zenit. So and I think Samat indicated in something I saw on Twitter earlier today that he's looking to give Claudinho a start soon. So maybe we might see him this weekend or in the final game before the international break, and I'm really looking forward to that. And as for Lokomotiv's point of view, it's intriguing now how Nikolic and Rangnick now are reshaping the squad. They're being linked with Alexis Becker, a young central midfielder from Cayenne in Ligue 2, and I see they were targeting another striker from Ligue 2 from Toulouse, whose name escapes me. But maybe this is a sign of the times from Lokomotiv's strategy going forward, now targeting young players in the French Ligue 2. So be excited to see what comes about in the next few weeks there. But yeah, it was the thing I can take from that game was maybe a slight switch in style from Zenit. It'd be interesting to see if this continues going forward.
Yeah, hopefully. I must admit I was a little bit perplexed by them, the rumours and the eventual departures of some quite big name players at Loko after the arrival of Rangnick and Zorn. But the links are promising. It's clear that they are trying to definitely get a younger, more dynamic squad, which is something that Loko have suffered of late, of having a squad which is a little bit on the old side, especially, say, Krakowiak. I mean, Krakowiak, Becker and Krakowiak, two totally types of players in terms of their age and dynamism, and that exactly is what Rangnick likes in his teams. I just wonder if they can adapt quickly to his style of play, because it is very intensive, and they will have to adapt quick and jump on that and get used to that as soon as they can. David, one of the other big teams, Krasnodar, played against the strugglers Arsenal 2 at the weekend, and that game particularly interested you.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I mean, the lineups from both teams were interesting. Krasnodar rested or dropped Safonov. He was on the bench. Tony Villeneuve was also not in the squad. Reports of an argument with Ilian, and then there was reports that he just has a contract dispute because he wants to leave. So we had Kornushin playing at right back, making his senior debut. He's a guy who's been in the FNL for Krasnodar 2 and Volgar for the last couple of seasons. Akatse was in goal. You had then classic strong team up front of Klaassen, Krychowiak, Kabela, Cordova as the front four, and then obviously Yonov, but I'm not including him. So they had a weak team sort of on paper put out with some players, and then you had Arsenal too, that also gave a debut to a right back from their academy, Sukhanov, and they went out early and took the lead. Sukhanov actually got the assist for Lutsenko with a couple of goals. Obviously, he missed a lot of last season with injury, which was a big loss for Arsenal. Probably a big reason as to why they struggled so much, considering when we think back to the year before, Lutsenko was, he got called up to the Russia squad and obviously missed out because of injury there as well. But he got them underway, and that, I think, just woke Krasnodar up a little bit. Cordoba looks like a really astute signing. He looks like he's going to do business in the RPL. He's now scored in 3 separate games. Obviously, granted, the first one was just a penalty against Ural, but he scored against Zenit. He scored again against Arsenal. He actually had a penalty which he hit the bar with as well, so he could have scored twice this weekend. He also got an assist. He looks like a good. They put some good money on him, but he has already adapted. 3 goals already is a great return, and it looks like he's going to do the business of replacing the goals that they lost with Berg up front, which is good. So it was good from their perspective. Arsenal rotated a little bit. They played Bjornström at left back, and he didn't have a particularly good game. But in Klusevic and Zuriko, both these young guys are sort of playing as the wingers, supporting Lutsenko. Obviously, Klusevic can play in defence as well. But they both started the season particularly well, I think. Obviously, Arsenal in general haven't played great. Obviously, they got a nice win against Krylia a couple of weeks ago. But if it's going to be, Klusevic was linked to Rubin and Cisco over the summer, but I think Rubin were allegedly balked because of his wage demands. But he's going to be probably off within the next 2 transfer windows. He looks a really tidy player, and I'm sure a bigger team can make use of him. But I think there's signs there that they may start coming good. You had Ayaz Guliev even played off the bench, wearing number 9, which was a bit of a disgrace, to be honest, considering he's a midfielder. But Lutsenko coming back, scoring twice. He scored again at the end. It was just a consolation mine. But they had Krasnodar on the ropes a little bit once he got to 3-2 for the last 5 minutes, and I think they were pleased when the whistle came, Krasnodar. But promising signs for both teams, I think. With Cordoba coming in, it's great news. Obviously, Krasnodar's squad is still heavily unbalanced in terms of the foreigners that they've got, and they're lacking a little bit on the bench in depth. They have 4 less subs named compared to Arsenal, so the squad's small. Obviously, they're missing players as well for injury, and obviously Valencia is missing for other reasons. But Krasnodar, as we said, we still need stuff to do, but good performance from them, but still defensively shaky.
Yeah, so a little bit more of the usual carried on from last year, but I must admit I'm also pretty enthused about Cordoba. He looks, like you said, exactly like a younger version of Marcus Berg, more mobile, which is huge for Krasnodar, and a pretty smart signing as well. And apparently, was it Nobel Ostromian the other day revealed that apparently they only actually paid 10 million euros and not as reported 20, which at this current rate, early doors, looks like a potential steal, really.
Yeah, good money.
Richard, CSKA Rostov, how was the Army men doing this season?
I watched this game. I have to say, CSKA showed some promising signs. Slowly starting to see some trends emerging under Alexei Barazutsky. The player who really caught my eye in this game was Chidere Juke. And I actually think now, we don't know what's going to happen with Nikola Vlasic yet. Some of the early interest in the transfer window from right at the beginning of the window seems to have faded away, although I suspect there might be some late deals this window across Europe. So we'll have to wait and see what happens regarding him departing. But I think Juke is very, very well placed to take over from Vlasic as CSKA's main man. He's definitely improving from last season. He impressed me against Dinamo, and I think he was deservedly man of the match in this game. He just caused Rostov problems all game from wide areas. I think some of his combination play with Chalov was good. He set up Chalov for the second goal that CSKA scored. A nice, brilliant run from midfield. I think he evaded a challenge, managed to stay on his feet, sprinted through the field, and then passed it to the left for Chalov, who finished really well into the bottom corner. And yeah, I think CSKA, there was some improvement from some of the earlier performances in the season. Still not massively convinced with Jacobiol, but it looks like they are looking like they're going to play him at centre half, central defence now. So they're obviously a little bit short there, and with the other options are Viktor Vasin and Vadim Karpov. Well, Karpov a bit harsh because he's still quite young, but yeah, Viktor Vasin is certainly no improvement on Biol at centre half. We all know how terrible he is nowadays. Obviously, Bruno Fuchs is now back, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there, whether they just go with Biol as the reserve central defender. And yeah, signs that there's some progress. I have to admit, I think Rostov are pretty poor, and I think this weekend's game against Nizhny Novgorod is really important for them. They definitely look like they're dropping off in standards, and they don't win that game against Nizhny at the weekend, then I think they could be in for a really tough season going forward. Just see what CSKA do. I think they're on 7 foreign players at the moment. They brought a young striker off the bench late on, so ahead of Gaish, which was quite interesting. This young striker, his name escapes me, but I thought that was quite an interesting call. Been to see what they do late on if there's any late transfer window business at CSKA. I personally think they're on 7 foreigners at the minute. If they do sell Vlasic, I'd also probably sell Gaish if they could offload him, because you've got Chalov and you've also got Zabolotny, and they've not got Europe. So I think they might as well give Chalov this season to see if he can rediscover his goal-scoring form. And I'd actually put the money towards a pair of fullbacks if I was CSKA, because they need to be proactive, because Fernandez has got a few more years left, but he's indicated already that he might be retiring from football in the next 2 to 3 years. So maybe a young foreign right back with someone 19, 20 who can learn from him this season and probably gradually look to take over from him maybe next season or the season beyond is probably an option, and definitely a left back. I think, I don't really think playing Obyakov there full time is really a long-term solution. I think he's better in midfield. So a pair of fullbacks and maybe a Vlasic replacement if they can have the free spots free with some of the money they get from sales would be a good idea. I think that's what I'd be doing if I was CSKA. But yeah, some signs of progress from Berezutski, and I think they play Akhmat at home at the weekend. I'm looking forward to that one because Tal Layev's had a good start there, so that should be quite a good game, I think.
Yeah, certainly. I'm still not convinced about Berezutski in charge of CSKA, and I've watched some of the games this season, and they are playing better football than they did under Vitor Olic, ever so slightly. But I'm just not fond of having these club legends come in. I've said it before and I've said it again. I just don't ever think it truly does really work out. More often than not, it really just sours the relationship that they had from their playing days. But one last game we'll cover today, and that is a club legend at another club who's actually taken over at Nizhny Novgorod, Alexander Kerzhakov, of course, and that is Nizhny versus Ufa, David, which you've thought was one of your favourite games of the weekend, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed this game. Nizhny are at home, Ufa away. Obviously, I would have had a bit of a soft spot for Ufa. But it was quite a good open fixture, I thought. Nizhny was probably started the half better. First half, but they went in 0-0. Not Krasnodar. I just saw his name on the screen. That was why I said it. Agalarov got away early in the second half. Big ball over the top, and quite comically, the Nizhny defender who was chasing back lost his balance and did a diving front forward roll and got straight back on his feet to try and catch him, but it was too late. The damage was done. Agalarov was away. and he went away and scored. The Nizhny's new Hungarian centre back then headed in for 1-1. And Ufa then got a penalty, which honestly was a pretty soft penalty, I thought, personally. Actually, no, I was thinking of a different penalty. It was a penalty, this one. Agalarov just first the ball. Nigmatulin was slow. It should have been Nigmatulin's ball, because it was just a bouncing ball in the 6-yard box. Agalarov just nipped in, popped it over the top of Nigmatulin. It went wide, but Nigmatulin followed through and took Agalarov out. Ivanov stuck the penalty away. But Ufa started the season well. I thought personally. Last year they were struggling, but they had some good players. Vladislav Kamilov had a very good season. I thought they've kept Moritz Bauer permanently, who was actually playing a left wing back, as I recall, this week, which was interesting. Casantura, as we know, I think we've talked about him briefly before, coming in from futsal. Started the first couple of games on the bench, and the last 2 games he started. And honestly, looks like one of the best players for Ufa. He gets them moving. He does a bit sort of like what Urunov did back when Urunov broke through. Obviously, he's just today signed back for Ufa on loan this season, so that's a nice boost for them. But Casantura, coming out from futsal to playing full 90 minutes of football for a professional team is doing astonishingly well. He speaks fluent Russian, so I think that's helped his adaptation to the team. He just seems to have that reading of the game, which is incredible considering his background. He didn't really start playing football properly until he moved to Russia when he was like 19 or something. So it's a great story. For Nizhny, we got the other striker. Really, is the player I want to talk about. Both teams started their under 21 striker, and it's Timur Suleymanov, who was really good again. He's so dominant in the air. Really, really good at holding the ball up for his team. Bekim Balai, who they signed in the summer, has just done very little so far for them. But Nizhny is still top 5 right now. Kozhikov has done very well with a very modest squad, very modest budget. They've not signed too many players. They just brought in Richie Yenin, who was another player who Kozhikov worked with at Tomsk. There's talks that they're going to get Kirill Kosarev on loan from Rubin, who he also worked with at Tomsk. Now, Kosarev was meant to have moved out to Croatia, so I'm not sure where this one's come from. But Kozhikov's bringing in the players who he knows. They can't afford to sign players. And he's getting them some good performances out of his team. Kokoyev and Gotsuk at the back, with Masuero are doing well. They've surprised me a lot this season, because in pre-season Rubin beat them twice very comfortably. They've done well. And Ufa, I'm always pleased to see them win. So I'm just happy for both teams at this point who started the season. I think both surprisingly well.
Yeah, and to be fair, David, he did call that Suleymanov would. Called that he would, but you hope that he would, and did say that he'd impressed you last season as well. Yeah. So another one in the record books that we got right, and well, I say you.
Mm-hmm. It's always nice to be right, isn't it? Always nice. Like when I'm going to go off topic, but Carl Starfelt has not been getting good reviews at Celtic, and I'm just like, look, I did warn you, and it feels so nice to be in that position. Obviously, he might still come good. We saw him struggle to start with at Rubin, and then within his about a year in, he started to perform much more consistently. So, it's I don't want him to underperform, but it's always nice to be right, isn't it? A little bit.
I must admit, it was like they got the wrong Rubin defender. I mean, Starfelt was better towards, like you said, towards his later time at Rubin, but Scotland's an even more physical, aerially dominated league than Russia, and that's what he tended to struggle with, especially compared to the others around him.
The big caveat that I was telling people when they were asking me, people were asking me, what Starfelt like. I was saying, well, he's okay, but Rubin's defense was really good because of Abulgor. He was the plug. He was the guy stopping the ball getting to Starfelt. And if Celtic don't have that, then you've just got a defender who's okay, but for 5 million for a guy who's 26 or whatever, only got a couple of caps. I thought it was a bit of a wild deal, to be honest.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, that was just off topic.
So if we do rein it back into the RPL slightly, but away from the recent matches of late, I want to discuss some reform proposals. So basically, I'll take a little bit of time here to discuss a little bit more in depth the proposals of reform. And essentially in May, it was announced that the RFU had aimed to reform all professional leagues in the country, and that of which being the RPL, the FINA-L, and the PFL. Now, since then, of course, the FINA-L and PFL have been reorganised into what is the FINA-L and FINA-L Divar, so 1 and 2. With the FINA-L staying the same as the upper league, and then the FINA-L 2. At first, it was just basically renaming. It ever so slight rules change, but it does basically allow for longer term change and longer term unification in this new scope. But the RFU have actually turned to Dutch company Hypercube, and they're an analytical company in sports field, and particularly they specialise in the expertise of national championships. Now, according to Championat, the cost of this research is €170,000, and the RFU's official advertising and marketing partners will pay for them. Now, that does only actually include the sports and infrastructure components of the research. Hypercube have reported their work to the RFU on July the 1st, and they made the championships the change of the championship will be no earlier than the 2022-23 season. The company considered 4 key issues: the limit on the foreign players, the format of the competition, the fall to spring system, and the problem of intensity of the game. Now, this is a little bit old news. Most of us do know this already, but I will just recap to start the story there. Now, why are we discussing it now? Because it's actually getting towards crunch time, and the RPL clubs have until the 20th of August, which is, as of recording, tomorrow, to give their stances on the foreigner limit and the format of the league. Similar to it's not necessarily been announced yet if this is the Hypercube proposal, which I'll get into in a second, or if it's just the foreign limit and format. Now, the RFU had previously drafted solutions to abolish the limit, but Spartak and Ural are reportedly, according to the press, against the abolition, but the former may still vote for it to be scrapped. Zenit in particular and most of the other major clubs want to get rid of it. Obviously, a lot of the European clubs are in favour of getting rid of it because it directly limits their European performance. Spartak, on the other hand, are run by Leonid Fedun, and Leonid Fedun is not just a megalomaniac, but he's a narcissist as well. And he basically would oppose the decision because it's not his decision, it's not his idea. That's how much of a narcissist this man is. If it was his idea, then he'd go for it. He's not looking at it in terms of Spartak or the league or Russia in general. He's looking at it in how can Leonid Fedun gain benefit from this, which to Spartak fans and probably everybody else who knows a modicum about Russian football, that is not surprising in the least. But anyway, I do digress. To quickly, before handing it over to Richard and David, I will quickly just summarise some of the reforms. So they prepared 4 options towards the RFU, and they called these 4 options and the existing RPL format different names. Now, they called the RPL current format Earth 16. The alternatives are Earth 18, Mars 16, Jupiter 16, and Jupiter 20. Now, it is a little bit of a bizarre naming convention, but the general idea is that the further the planet is from Earth, the more difficult it is to implement. So obviously Jupiter 20 would be far more difficult to implement than Earth 18. Why they did this, I don't know, but that's a general why what is called what and where the differentiation comes from. Now, the full reforms are detailed in their entirety, proposals are detailed in their entirety on the RFU website. But just to quickly go through, of course, the current RPL format is the two groups all playing, the two circles all playing with each other, according to the same scheme as other European championships. But the intensity of other European championships, such as English, German, Spanish, and French, has been noted by Hypercube as to be at a far higher level. Comparatively, an example they use, a Premier League game between Burnley and Newcastle United causes far more of a stir, both domestically and internationally, than Spartak CSKA does. Simply put, those who already have enough of everything can afford to play in the traditional format, the status and the principled matches, and thus the funds from TV broadcasts. Now, what they propose is a change to increase revenue, to increase interest, and increase competitivity and intensity, which would then, of course, if you build it, they will come, would allow the first two to happen. Now, for Earth 18, practically doesn't really change from the current one. The number of participants would increase to 18, hence the 18. Secondly, the struggle for a second position of the Conference League would intensify. The teams that are 4th to 7th will have to compete among themselves for a playoff to get into that second position in the third tier. This is a direct copy of the Dutch Eredivisie, apart from the fact that there are teams competing for the Conference League from 5th to 8th in their league. Mars 16 is a little bit more complicated. This implies a more complicated system in general, which actually has no similar analogue in Europe. After 16 teams have played a regular championship, they would then be divided into 3 groups. The 1st to 4th would play each other home and away, and that would determine who makes it to the Champions League and who makes it to the Conference League. 5th to 12th would play among themselves in a playoff format. The winner of that will be eligible to compete for a place in the Conference League against the 4th place team from the first group. And then in a third group would be the relegation playoffs. So 13th and 14th would play, 15th and 16th play each other, would go down, and 13th and 14th would play 3rd and 4th. So it's very similar to what we have now. It is a complex scheme, of course, with the 3 separate groups of playoff games at the end. There is similar in Belgium, but not exactly the same. In Belgium, they have 1st to 4th and 5th to 8th, fighting for European positions, and then the bottom 2 are directly relegated. There's another one called Jupiter 16, which is basically, I'll try and paraphrase it more, but it's more aligned towards the Swiss system rather than the Belgian system. In Russia, before the start of the season, the teams would be divided into 4 groups, 4 in each. They would then play 6 matches with the opponents in the group, 3 at home, 3 away. You will only need to play it with someone only at home at one stage. So there would be, 2 teams playing in different home and away legs. It wouldn't be symmetrical, essentially. In total, the teams would play 24 games in the first stage, and it would be more competitive within itself because it's in theoretically closer teams playing each other. So you have bigger teams playing each other more often, the ones in the middle playing mid-table, and then relegation playing each other more often. After the 24 rounds, a split would take place. The first 6 teams would then go and play for European competition, and all of the rest of the 10 would fight for survival, as well as the right for the conference leagues and a little round robin. So a little bit more confusing. And then there is Jupiter 20, which is similar to the old one, but an even more advanced second stage. So in terms of both Europe and relegation, but the essence remains the same. There'll simply be more matches. Dutch specialists have took into account the Russian clubs' proclivity to fall to economically to the wayside year in, year out, and only a limited number of teams can actually afford to play in the Premier League. So this one's a little bit, it gets in the weeds, but trust me, it's similar to what's used in the MLS. The teams are divided into 2 conferences, East and West. Everyone plays home and away in their conference. And according to the results of the regular season, these playoffs begin in each conference at the end of the season as the 6th best teams in each, who play a mini tournament among themselves, and thus you would have the best team in the East and the best team in the West play each other. So it's like I say, it's similar in terms of the different groups, but it's essentially what these different proposals are doing is outlining how it could make the league in general more competitive and more of an even split, and thus more appealing to international markets, because they understand that the foreigner limit, the current format, the calendar, and the lack of funding are the 4 biggest problems affecting Russian football right now. So away from all the structural things, those 4 points are the big recommendations of the Hypercube system. So after getting all into the weeds and everything, sorry for bored half of you there, because it is a little bit much. Richard, what do you think about some of the Hypercube proposals? Firstly, is reform necessary? And which sort of route would you like the RFU to go down?
I think some kind of reform to the structure is definitely something worth exploring. I'm not sure about some of those proposals put forward, though. Even if you put the format back to a spring to autumn format, I'm still not fully certain on that. Maybe one idea could be you drop to a 14-team league, you play home and away against each other, and that goes up to 26 games, and then you probably split the league up into 3 groups. So you have like 1st to 4th fight for the championship, then maybe 5th to 10th fight for that final Conference League spot, and then below that fight for relegation. Maybe that's an idea that I'd like to put forward. Certainly worth, some of these other leagues now, like Austria, Switzerland, they have these kind of splits, don't they, in them? So that's something worth having a look at, maybe. Definitely competition format change. As for keeping the current format, whether it's a autumn to spring calendar like we have now, or going back to the old spring to autumn calendar, understandably see the benefits of both. Obviously, you have to be understanding that the UEFA dates for internationals and Champions League matches do throw a little complication in the works, because obviously you've got to fit any extra games that you have. If you decide to have initial league format and then a league split, you have to obviously make sure there's enough free dates to be able to do that. So, but it is certainly something worth exploring. To me, the big one is the foreigner limit. I think, and it was interesting as well looking at some of these Hypercube reforms about, I think what they were proposing, weren't they, was that you had to have, I think it was 4 young players in your side, like of a certain age, under a certain age, and then I think 4 Russian players in your squad. And then the foreign player limit is completely removed. So, for example, if you had that, you would have 8 Russian players. Theoretically, a side could have a 25-man squad with, I think it's 17 foreign players and 8 Russians. So technically, you could go that. I don't think that it will come to that any club will do that, but have to have that many foreigners on the books. But they could theoretically do that. That for me is the big one, the foreign limit. I think that, for starters, has to be amended. From the current setup of 8. 8 in a squad is not enough. We've seen in the RPL, from the RPL clubs who compete in Europe this season, we've seen that they just don't have the squad depth. Your example of Spartak, James, reportedly thinking of voting against the limit is absolutely ludicrous. They've been looking to strengthen their squad all summer. They brought in a new manager, Rui Vitória. They haven't strengthened their squad. They're wondering why they can't strengthen their squad. Let me think. Oh yes, foreign limit. You're already at the limit. And now, there's reports of them having to sell Samuel Gigo now, with only 1 year left on his contract, for a paltry sum, just to be able to give Vitória the chance to freshen up the squad. Because, they can't buy any new foreign players now because they're on the limit. They have to buy Russian. There's not a lot of good quality Russian players around. I think this is definitely a positive. And it'd be interesting to see how they implement that, though, because I was looking also at the Hypercube, how they would go about, players getting work permits to play in Russia, because they were talking about having a system which similar to the Premier League, where you look at international caps. Now, the Premier League is streets ahead of Russian football in terms of standard, in terms of everything, really. It's, if not the best league in the world, one of the best 3. They can kind of afford to go down that route, because international players playing from all over the world will come to the Premier League because it's the richest league in the world. Russian football has obviously less of a pull to it. and the standards have dropped quite a bit in the last few years. So I'd also look at the strength of the league that clubs are buying from proportionate to just looking at whether they've got international caps. I mean, let's look at two of the best foreign players who've played in Russia and were integral to one of the side's two championship successes. This side I'm talking about is obviously Rubin Kazan. In 2007, they bought Christian Noboa from Emelec in Ecuador, and in 2008, they bought Cesar Navas from Racing Santander in Spain. Noboa only got his first Ecuador cap in 2009. So actually, under these Hypercube reforms, would he have actually got a work permit to play in Russia? And likewise with Navas, because obviously Navas was not an international. I know there's an appeals committee that they're setting up to look at, certain cases of players. So, for example, ones that are uncapped, whether or not they would be granted a work permit. But I think strength of league should also be looked at too, because, let's say, for example, you've got an international from a lower ranked UEFA nation like someone like Moldova, for example. You could have an international who plays for them who's interested in a Russian Premier League club, but is he of the same level as, let's say, for example, a Spanish or Italian or French player who's playing for a side at the bottom end of Ligue 1, La Liga or Serie A, but hasn't got a cap for his country and won't? But if there's still a player who can come in and improve the quality of the sides, like Cesar Navas was from Rubin Kazan from Racing Santander, then I think we should allow some leeway with that. And someone like Pablo Massaguero, for example, of Nizhny, would he have got a work permit under these rules? I think that is something important to consider. And bear in mind, if someone like Torpedo, an ambitious Feniel club, comes up and then the limits abolished for them, they've got wealthy owners, they're going to be looking at, for foreign players, leagues like Greece, Bulgaria, maybe Turkey. They're not going to be shopping in the same kind of markets as the likes of Zenit, Spartak, Krasnodar, who can go to leagues like Liga and Bundesliga, Serie A for players. So I think there's some interesting things to come from that. I think it's definitely going to improve things if the foreign limit is removed. I think definitely needs to go, because we've seen how it hinders Russian clubs in Europe. And yeah, I agree with one of the other Hypercube recommendations about tempo of the game, and it definitely needs to improve in Russia. I think they need to adapt to new trends, gegenpressing, quick combination play between the lines, verticality. We need to see more of this in Russian football. We're not seeing enough of this, and not even in just the top 5 leagues. In other leagues, which have been until recently ranked similar to Russia, leagues like Netherlands, Portugal, even Rakov were good in transition against Rubin the other day, and they're just a debutant side playing in Europe, and yet they're so well coached on the transition, they were really good. So other leagues are catching up. So yeah, I definitely agree. The intensity of games in the Premier League has to improve, in the Russian Premier League has to improve a lot, and hopefully, with these recommendations will be passed on to the clubs, so we start getting coaches playing more progressive styles. Maybe the lifting the foreign limit as well might encourage more foreign coaches to come to Russia, because now that the limit's abolished, it might make the jobs more attractive, because they're not having to just work on the limits and restrictions. So yeah, I'm in favour of a decent amount of the Hypercube reforms, and I seriously hope they get voted through.
Yeah, I think we speak for most fans of Russian football that even if not these reforms in terms of the structure, but the reforms around transfers, funding, particularly the foreigner limit and the composition of the squads are absolutely vital. Really, really are vital now more than ever, especially with the RPL on the precipice in terms of the coefficients and the potential backlash of falling into potentially even beyond 20th in the UEFA leagues. I think the terms of the system of obviously removing the squad foreigner limit and having a similar one to what's currently existing in England right now, in the having a percentage of homegrown players within the squad is a nice mix. It would allow players who are not necessarily Russian but have graduated in Russian academies to become part of a squad. Obviously, they would have the odd little weird little sort of development here and there, like you would see Manchester City paying Richard Wright £10,000 a week to literally do absolutely nothing apart from fill a number in terms of the homegrown you will probably see that. Some experienced goalkeepers who are like in the late 30s just picking up a third goalkeeper's role to help some of the youngsters and literally fill in a spot. But far rather have the third choice goalkeeper filling a spot than a draconian, very tight squad limit, or even far more draconian, very tight pitch limit. So, David, anything to add on? Any final thoughts on the potential reform and what you would like to see reformed first and foremost?
Well, I'm all for the squad limits. The foreign limit. We all know that needs changing. The teams need more flexibility. If they're going to bring in restrictions on players who can come, it needs to be balanced because, as Richard said, the smaller teams aren't going to have the same pull as the bigger teams, and so they're going to need access to, guys like, the Slovenians who come over and do quite well, or the Croatians. I'm thinking of guys like Skolfek who came, Orenburg had a few guys, Begic, Despot, like these kind of guys who came across from Serbia as well, who are now RPL regulars. There needs to be some good balancing. It might not be weighted to league or caps. It might even be weighted to, a player who's of nationality of the top 50 nations. So Serbia presumably would fall within the top 50, and then they could maybe go and sign out a player from there. I don't know, but if they're going to do like a work permit system, it needs to be fine tuned to make it fair, so that smaller teams can bring across players who are going to improve, but who also are going to want to come across. We've seen plenty a lot of foreign players going there this summer, and predominantly they're from your Serbias, your Baltics, and your Balkans essentially. So that's there, but I'm not a fan of any of these leagues that do splits. I think it's overcomplication. It's, for me, football is, a league season is a league season. When you play the same big teams every week, it takes the shine off those times where a team does meet. We all think, right, that the Krasnodar Zenit game from a couple of seasons ago is one of the best games we've seen in the RPL. If they're playing each other, 3 times in 8 weeks, then that sort of takes, or whatever it might be, it's going to take the shine off the games. A Moscow derby, when they're played every week, becomes less of a not phenomenon, but I'm going to go with phenomenon. That's not the word I want. Less of a spectacle. Fans aren't going to be as excited about a Moscow derby when they've got to play each other every week. It's the season's all about, for me, a season is, you have to go out there and you have to prove that you can do it against the big teams and the small teams. Rubin last season were terrific against the big teams. Beat Zenit twice, beat a lot of the Moscow teams, but often didn't show up against the small teams, and that's ultimately why they didn't finish as high as they could have. I wouldn't be a big fan of any of the new league reforms. I'm happy with the league staying as a 16 team, play each other twice. Maybe even expanding to 18 would, I think, be fine. But I think the league is, in terms of structure, is fine how it is. There's talk. The only thing I would maybe consider is maybe putting it back to a March-November season structure, in place with, the other winter nations rather than working alongside the summer nations. That's the only thing I would personally consider. I wouldn't be a fan of any of the reforms, but we'll have to see what happens, and I'll watch along all the same.
Yeah, certainly. In terms of structure, I think I've supported vast regionalisation and lessening homogenisation of the lower leagues in the what's now the Finna L2, splitting that into the 6 zones, amalgamating the East into the rest, trying to minimise the travel costs for them, help subsidising their travel costs as well, is a good idea. That's because of the financial perils of the clubs and the size of the geography of the nation. Yes, it's difficult finding 16 clubs who can be financially solvent, but this is why we're seeing so many teams being backed in some form or sponsored in another form by Gazprom. for me, instead of tinkering too much with the structure of the RPL in particular, increasing intensity and increasing attractiveness of the pitch is done by increasing the standard of coaching, increasing the standard of play, introducing more foreign players and foreign managers with different ideas, with different forms and ways to play the game and different approaches. All of this just makes it a more attractive league, rather than necessarily trying to impose structural reform. Yes, they have it in Switzerland. Yes, they have it in Belgium. Those leagues aren't necessarily that much more successful, but they are, granted, to be fair, more successful in the last couple of years than Russian teams have been in Europe. So perhaps it does increase the coefficient of the league, but does it necessarily make it more marketable and more exciting and easier to watch? Maybe not. Maybe because of the domination of the top four leagues, in particular the Premier League and the Bundesliga, maybe they're fighting a losing battle in terms of the marketing the RPL. But Richard, I'll let you jump in now for some final words on these reforms. And
yeah, I just want to say as well that the smaller clubs too, I think this abolition of the limit will help them, because look, they're not going to be able to buy as many foreign players as the top clubs. Now, obviously, some of them might be thinking, oh well, if we do vote to abolish the limit, this will allow the top clubs to buy even more foreign players. They'll pull further away from us. But the flip side of that is, whilst you might not be able to afford as many foreign players as the top clubs, what you also will be able to get hold of is now you'll see players like Nikolai Raskazov, you'll see players like Ilya Kutepov, you'll see other players too now who will become available for transfer at the top clubs, and they will have to drop down to these mid to lower table clubs. And and there are players at the top clubs who are only there at the minute really because of the limit, because of the limits on foreign players. When the limits are gone, those players can drop down, and it would increase the intensity for everybody. Then those smaller mid-table to lower mid-table clubs will be able to get hold of these players, and they will be upgrades on what they currently have. And I'll tell you something now. It would be very interesting to see if tomorrow, I think the vote is, isn't it? I think it's tomorrow. It'll be very interesting to see tomorrow if the vote to abolish the limit goes through as per the Hypercube recommendations. I bet then we will suddenly see an increase in intensity all across the board in training and in games from a lot of the Russian players currently playing in the RPL, who are not, the Russian internationals, the ones who are starters at the minute, because straight away then, with the limit gone for next year, they would then have to work a lot harder and, train, be on it all the time to guarantee selection. Now, there will be no, limit, so, the intensity levels will go up. So, it'll be very interesting to see the reaction if this does go through tomorrow, and fingers crossed that they do vote to abolish the limit tomorrow. But yeah, just thought I'd add in that extra little line there about it would free up the likes of Kutepov, and players like Raskazov then would drop down, and it would allow Spartak more depth to their squad, which they can recruit more players through. So yeah, I think it's gonna have benefits to everybody. I think not just the top clubs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. And with that, we have run over ever so slightly in what is RFN tradition, to be more than honest. But that is the end of this week's podcast. We'll have the usual coverage. There's going to be an article with all the highlights and the scores from last week's matches on the site as soon as possible. Keep an eye out for some upcoming interviews that are quite interesting, and I'll not spoil anything or give any teasers yet. But yeah, we'll be back next week at the regular time. But for now, this has been the RFN podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.